Hello and welcome to episode 12 of Taking Liberties. My name is Lee. We're going to be talking this week about all sorts of things to do with liberty, and to help me with that, we've got Austin.
Whoa.
We've got Zeev.
Yo.
We've got Vicus.
Hey, nice to be back.
We should make people aware that at least two members of this of the crew have got croaky voices. So, Austin from Too Much Singing and Zeev from, I don't know, what? Oh, because you got a flu. Yeah, you got a cold, so.
Karaoke is a hazardous activity.
Yep. All right, well, this week we're going to be talking about two closely related ideas. First one being we talk about Dick Smith and his attempt to unseat Tony Abbott at the next election on a platform of sustainable population. So, Vicus, this is something that you seemed pretty keen to talk about. So why don't you go into first?
So, what can I say? I like talking about Dick. And so getting to the point. Just talking about it. So, so Dick Smith, he wanted to have this when Kevin Rudd was doing the whole big thing about big Australia and what that means. We were talking about a potential population of 50 million. So Dick Smith came out, guns a blazing, made this big sort of mockumentary, I called it, but it was technically a documentary, and he got it popped up on the ABC, and it basically became this big sort of conversation changer, where all of a sudden now people were going, hang on, we're not sure that 24 million people is enough, right? So 50 million, that's way out of the bounds. And I said, let's pick a number that's more realistic. We don't have the infrastructure to support 50 million, which was pretty much the point of the Big Australia discussion. So instead, now we're looking at, I think government estimates with current immigration trains at 36 million or whatever it is. But apparently Dick Smith believes that's too much, and he's got this whole really old school view of, well, it's actually quite, it's not even socialist, it's older than that.
It's 1790s. I think it's 1799 was Thomas Malthus's an essay on population.
Yeah.
So we're talking Adam Smith old.
No, old, yeah. So Adam Smith old, he sincerely, and I say sincerely because I have I have been given no indication to believe that this is malice or anything like that. He actually...
No, Malthus, not malice.
Okay. But he actually believes...
10 points to Austin. Anyway,
he actually believes that for every, person that's come into Australia, everybody else is left slightly poorer. And that's kind of his justification for saying, we've got to keep the population small. It's, we don't want to rob our kids of, our wealth. And quite frankly, I can't tell if it's him being bad at math or him being bad at science to hold that position.
Probably a bit of both. I mean, this view particularly, in our sort of the last 100 years, really, Paul Ehrlich made the environmentalists made a huge mistake by coming out writing a book in the late 60s saying, in the 70s and 80s there's going to be massive famine because we literally have too many people and we cannot feed them all, which was Malthus's point back in 1790 whatever. And
the thing is, population only grows in proportion to the amount of people that it can sustain.
Yeah.
People have children because they think that they can afford to have children and feed them. So it's actually kind of a patronizing statement in a sense to say that the global population is increasing so much that it has to be controlled and reduced for us to survive. It's really saying everyone out there having children has no idea what's good for their children's future at all. They should stop. They have not, because they're bringing their children into this apocalyptic Mad Max reality, apparently, where we will all starve.
Yeah.
And put that way, it is a nonsense, really, I think.
And the other thing that almost never gets taken into account by any of these people is innovation. They think that they can basically say, this is what we can do at the moment, this is the amount of people we can sustain, however they want to use it, and then they go, okay, times this by time and population growth, and they just imagine that the innovation stays stagnant. But I mean, what all the economists talk about when it comes to immigration. I mean, this fits in with immigration as well. Was that people bring ideas? Every time you add a new person, you're adding more ideas, you're adding more potential. And if you think, okay, out of the percentage of population, you've got 0.5% chance of getting the next Steve Jobs or getting a Isaac Newton or getting a Beethoven. You got this tiny proportion. Well, by having more people, you have more chance of more people with big ideas, with the next idea that will revolutionize the world. So it's I mean, and there's also the whole economic side of things, but as well, which we can get into. But I mean, really, even just at a basic level, you say, well, people bring ideas, and those ideas is what change the world. And if you stop having more people, you stop having new ideas. And that's something they almost never take into account, is innovation, which is kind of disturbing that they think so poorly of people that they can't imagine that humans can make the world better. And I think that's, for me, the most disappointing aspect of this Malthusian view, is that they kind of think that humans are a virus. This plague on the, this plague of locusts on the world, and we just, we have to stop having more people because they don't contribute anything, and that's completely not the case.
Well, I would actually say we're not viruses, we're elephants. And what I mean by that is viruses and bacteria, they have a population structure where they'll grow exponentially until they kill the host or run out of nutrients, and then they'll starve and die off. That's a bacterial level thing. Some fish populations follow the same thing. Other species, elephants being an emblematic one, their population will grow until they reach the carrying capacity of the land in which they live, and then they will naturally level off. Like, elephants will not populate to the point when they starve themselves. And I'm pretty sure humans will follow the same thing. I think we're at least as smart as elephants, and that even if there is an upper level carrying capacity, when we get there, we'll just stop having kids. And you actually see this in richer societies. The richer societies you get, the less population growth you see. That Europe, I think, was declining in population if it wasn't for immigration. And you see this all around the world.
Of course, part of that is not necessarily a result of this idea of an ideal population limit. It's simply a product of the costs of living imposing barriers to having more children. Now, the costs of living, as we good libertarians know, have multiple causes, among them housing,
high taxation,
and high taxation, and other methods of coercive regulation that impede people from trading freely. And that's
actually
also
just
a point that should be made in the immigration context. It's in retrospect, it's stunning, but conservatives sometimes say we're for a free market but not for immigration. But the reality is that specialization of labor is something that immigration allows.
Well, ironically,
I was actually just going to add the biggest thing that has actually contributed to a reduction in birth rates across the world has actually been the education of women, and that is by far the biggest thing that is going to level the population off. The more educated women there are, the more they hold off on having kids later in life, and the fewer kids they tend to have. They'll only go up to however many they feel like, rather than just popping them out like factories. So
and this is the thing. I mean, the idea that there is some population target or limit, I mean, presumes that we really know how much children each woman should have, and all of these things that are really a bunch of individual choices at the local level, I'd say. Anyway.
Well, it's not at the local level, it's at the individual level.
Yeah, I mean...
The individual level, yes, sorry.
I mean, really what this is targeting, though, is because population growth is not coming from women in Australia. Because, I mean, we actually, as Austin pointed out, we've got a declining population once you take out immigration. So really it's saying we shouldn't have more immigrants. So it's one of these situations where you've kind of, the left typically are supposed to be in favour of immigration, and yet here they are...
Since when?
Well... Theoretically,
hang on. I hate the fact that in 1975, all of a sudden, Gough Whitlam took this narrative, completely stole it from the Harold Holtz, and completely stole it from, the...
Yeah,
John Watts.
yeah.
But
I said theoretically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Harold Holt did his part to reduce the
Yeah,
Australian
yeah.
population.
I actually think I actually think that the left is against immigration. I mean, if you look at essentially, they're for refugees to come here on welfare. They're not here. They're not in favour of workers coming to Australia, and they're not in favour of poor people coming to Australia, particularly to work. It's only to come on welfare. So I don't buy into that narrative. I'm just saying that's their theoretically. They say they're in favour of immigration. Anyway, let's.
I don't agree with that. I think it's just a compassionate empathy for refugees. There may be a subset, an interest group that benefits from them being on welfare, but I don't think that's the main motivator for most of it.
Let's not get bogged down in whether the left. I mean, just to say that. I mean, what I meant is they're not in favour of things like 457 visas. So if you say let's let poor people come here and work, the unions say no, and now that the Greens are in favour of being in bed with the unions, the Greens now say no. So anyway, that's an aside. I didn't want to get bogged in that. But anyway. Anyway, like I didn't want to get bogged down in that. Just to say that, really, this is any talk of reducing population or reducing the growth of population in Australia is saying we should have less people move here, and particularly poorer people. It's like always, it's the burden that's going to fall on the poor. They're not going to say to engineers and doctors and these and IT workers, they say, oh, we're not going to let you in because we everybody knows we want them. When they start cutting when they start adding restrictions to immigration, it's going to be lower skilled workers who bear the brunt of that. And really, if you want to, I mean, it's not even, from what I understand, it's not even so much educating women, but making them less poor as well. So if you want to reduce poverty across the world, open borders helps with that because of remittances. Remittances are much huger, like much bigger than foreign aid.
Transfers of
money from
people, foreign workers own here, back overseas to their families in their home countries.
Yeah, and it's like 5 times as much gets sent through remittances than through foreign aid. So really, even if you just say, well, we'll let poor people come here to work, that's still reducing poverty overseas in a much bigger way and more effectively.
Making those poor people much wealthier. There are remarkable studies on how much wealthier people become simply by immigrating here.
Yeah. But that's not the point, right? The point is the people who oppose this are living in Western Sydney and not just Western Sydney, but also, basically the poorer parts of Melbourne. I don't know where those are. As far as I'm concerned, all of Melbourne's poor.
Shots fired.
Them's fighting words.
Yeah.
I digress. But anyway, so these punters obviously feel that for some reason someone's coming over to not just take their job but clog up the streets, screw up the infrastructure. And in fact, the number one reason, like people like Dick Smith will say, we need to clamp down on immigration or control immigration more tightly, is basically we don't have the infrastructure to support these people. And my general sort of rebuttal to that has been, so when the first fleet landed in Australia, was Sydney already built? Was Botany Bay already inhabited? Right? Was the infrastructure in place? Was there a rail line going from there to, Sydney Cove?
Exactly. Infrastructure expands to meet people's needs, to meet
Precisely.
people's demands, just like any other good or service on the market. Although, of course, infrastructure will expand poorly because it's government-run mostly.
It's the exact same argument that a potential parent might make by saying, well, we certainly can't have a child because we don't own a crib. It's just not possible, right?
Brilliant.
It's the exact same inanity of argument there.
Now, I think that the reason why some people might be right in this line of thinking, right, but they've misattributed it, is that in the 1930s we had a very forward-thinking sort of state government in place that decided, hey, let's build an 8-lane bridge across Sydney Harbour, right? And people went, that's madness. That's way more capacity than is going to be needed in North Sydney, right? But these guys said, well, hang on, we're planning to double the population of Sydney, right? And if we're planning to double the population of Sydney, you've got to have the infrastructure for the other side, right? And as a result, because of that forward thinking, and when the doubling of Sydney came into fruition, Sydney Harbour, the Harbour Bridge turned out to be a good deal. Now, people think, oh, hey, look, if all infrastructure was done like that, everything would be sweet. Right? We build all this wonderful infrastructure and then sort of just develop into it. And it would be great if that always happens, but keep in mind, for 30 years, that government was regarded as basically being lunatics, right? They did something that the people did not particularly like.
And it may be that it was a waste of money in that time.
Exactly. And no, that is my exact point. That is my exact point. That the very people that are saying, these, that you need something in place like this, are the same people arguing that there shouldn't be something in place like that because the government is stupid for planning that far in advance. That's my point.
Well, of course it is, undoubtedly, because no business would, set up this road hardly ever used, and then say, well, 30 years down the line, we'll be making a profit. But for now, losses all the way, baby.
Yeah.
Let's go broke. I mean, it's an absurd idea, but that's what forward thinking is in government terms, I suppose. Yes. So governments are very bad planners, and that's part of the reason why when infrastructure is built and it fails to predict what people want, I guess people tend to think perhaps we can't handle more immigration for that reason. Anyway, but I think I raised earlier that one of the reasons people have fewer children is because of cost of living factors, and one of those major cost of living factors is housing prices and zoning regulations in part as well, which came up in the news recently. Lee, take it away.
Well, what is there to say about all the things I could say about government regulation of housing? I don't think we have a show that's long enough for me to have give me enough chance to rant about how stupid it is. I mean, basically...
Yes, but what do you think of Tony Abbott saying that he hopes that Sydney's housing prices will stay high?
Well, essentially...
in favour of higher housing.
He clearly hates the poor people.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. Okay, so Milton Friedman had this great saying saying, if the government was put in charge of the Sahara's desert, we'd run out of sand in 5 years. And I think that basically sums up the entirety of housing policy in Australia. And the key reason is because politicians have every incentive in the world to make sure house prices only go up because everybody, particularly baby boomers, are highly leveraged into the housing market. Like so much money is invested in it because of bad policy, and so now essentially the deck is stacked. If the housing sector collapses, you're gonna have huge readjustment issues. Like Australians need to spend less in housing, but to do that, the bubble has to burst, and it's going to be it's going to be the biggest recession Australia will ever have.
Not necessarily, no. I mean,
there are 1.2 million
people have invested so much in this. I understand.
So
is that reason? Housing prices may fall, but one of the things that will come with it is the benefit of the centralisation of population. Sorry, more people moving in closer together. Denser living means cheaper transport.
Yeah, but that's the opposite. No, that's actually the opposite of what would happen. Denser living is what is happening currently, right? The population. So Sydney's density has gone from, I think it was, hang on, I probably need to yank up the statistics, but I know it's up to 1,100 now, 1,100 per square kilometre, and that's up almost 3 times from when I originally moved to Australia. So
it's not a bad thing.
I agree. I like higher density living. Higher density living means better service provision and a whole bunch of positive benefits like that.
There's like
However,
Thai places I can order from without leaving my couch, and that's the benefit of higher density living.
That is that's the best thing.
That's what housing policy should be revolved around. Thai restaurants.
Living goes down.
Housing
cost of living generally goes down.
Yes, it does. But housing policy right now, with limited land releases and zoning laws, are what is preventing sprawl, right? That is what's causing the densing. If you actually take a look at what happens when you get rid of zoning laws and when you get rid of, if you're more laissez-faire with land releases, and my go-to cities for this are like, Houston, Dallas, basically anywhere in Texas, because Texas is awesome. What happens is you get these cities that have very high density in a small county area, but there is a significant amount of sprawl. Like, for example, I think the best example is probably Houston. Houston has roughly the same population as Sydney, but it is about 3 times as spread out.
Bigger in Texas.
Everything is bigger in Texas.
Look,
But
that
so-
could be a byproduct of a
so-
lot of things. But go.
It could be a byproduct of a lot of things, but the biggest thing any time there has been a relaxation of
People move
land
out.
releases.
Yeah.
Whenever there's been a relaxation of land releases, people tend to spread out. The property prices tend to come down, and the housing crisis in America the bubble bursting in America was fantastic because those properties in the inner city suddenly dropped from $500,000 to about $200,000 for a fairly decent sized property. Now the issue is, if you were to see something similar in Australia, you are talking roughly 10% of the Australian population leveraged, right, in this way with negative gearing, right? And you're talking.
Are we talking about that now?
Well,
No,
we won't talk about that, but
we
just
won't
to
talk
say
about
that
that.
it is.
I'm just talking about the numbers here on how big this recession could be. I'm saying 10% of the population is affected, and you're talking roughly about $3 billion per year.
Yeah.
So it's a sizable chunk of the economy. It's about 1% of the economy in terms of real dollar terms, but the population-wise, it's about 10% that might be, basically really, really hard done by if that bubble bursts.
And I mean, it's not even so much like older, because older people generally tend to have homes that are closer to the city. So in some ways, they'll actually retain more of their value. So I mean, the market will completely readjust. But I think who's going to get hit hardest is new homeowners, because essentially all these people living on the edge of the city, they're going to get completely wiped out. Like they're going to lose everything, almost everything in their home, and there's no politician that is crazy enough to actually do anything about that. So it's one of those situations where the market will adjust. And I'm actually relatively confident that the market would adjust rather quickly. Like I don't think it would be a thing where 10 years down the track, there'd be, still be market trying to sort out its stuff. No, I think this is actually relatively straightforward. It's just that for that 1 or 2 years, even probably just a year, when everything's readjusting, when the market's, going to where its natural state is of supply and demand. And that year and a half is going to be absolute frigging hell, and no politician is going to be able to withstand the political storm that comes with it. Like, essentially, it is to commit harakiri. You are going to stand in front of a TV camera and cut your guts open and spill your intestines on the ground, because that's the end of your government. There's no way people are going to be willing to But the crazy thing is it has to happen. Otherwise, it's just we're going to have a US style.
Well, the thing is, I don't know if these apocalyptic predictions here are true. Because at the end of the day, I mean, every new development that springs up as a result of relaxed zoning laws is another person employed with a living to make, and passing on more wealth into the population. What we're talking about here is wealth increasing at the end of the day, and I don't know if that will create It will create, obviously, some losers, but I don't know if everyone will be net losers.
Well, in the long term, it creates wealth. But in the short term, you've got people who have got more in their loans. I mean, essentially, the banks are going to get smashed as well, because they've lent all this money out and it's not going to get repaid. But that
doesn't matter. We've got credit easing in place.
Yeah.
The banks aren't going to give two shits.
But in the end, it's not so much it's not going to create wealth. Of course, it will create wealth. It will be a universally better. It will be even better for new homeowners to have this readjustment. But the thing is, as soon as you announce that policy change, all the value of their homes is going to drop substantially, and they're going to still have those loans there. So it's the default side of things. That it's the being underwater, and
they no longer have the asset that actually justifies the cost of the loan. They're the ones who are going to be hurt. And you're right. Yep. Overall, people will benefit, but there's going to be a fairly significant population of people who have loans and they don't have an asset now that's worth the cost of the loan.
Yeah, and I was going to say, the other benefit that people might not be thinking about, and I realize I'm probably going to get the leftist tag here, is that it would actually go a long way towards fixing up income inequality in the country.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yep.
Yeah.
And increasing homelessness as well.
I don't know if it is. But the other thing is, I mean, all kinds of costs go down. Businesses will find it cheaper to rent.
In the long run. Everything you're talking about is absolutely right in the long run.
Well, it's not. No, in the short run, the rent goes down.
Yeah.
And so too does the cost of charging for your services.
But we're not the ones you have to convince that this is a good idea.
Yeah.
That this is a good idea.
Yeah.
The problem is you have to convince the person who is going to suddenly say, I have a loan for $1 million and I have a house that's worth $200,000.
Yeah.
That's the person you have to convince that this is a good policy.
Yeah.
I mean,
it's going to be very difficult to say, well, there'll be more business and maybe
Yeah.
things
Yeah,
go down
that's
with
true.
people.
There are
And the
Very
newspapers
tough
will have a
argument to sell.
field
there are
day.
some people in that position. Yeah.
I mean, newspapers sell on headlines, and you will have for 18 months straight nothing but apocalyptic headlines from, and they'll find every single homeowner on the fringes of the city that gets an absolute hosing. I mean, in the town I live in, Busselton, the median house price probably is. Well, like the entry level is about 400 grand, and every one of those people, because there's plenty of land. If there was reduced regulation, the price of housing in the town I live in would be minuscule, because it's a relatively small town and it's a nice place to live, and there's heaps of farmland, so there's lots of flat space you can build houses, and everybody who's building homes right now would just get an absolute pound, just get smashed, because the supply would massively open up. But the thing is, and the newspaper will interview every single one of those people, and the politicians are going to eat it every single day, and the opposition will find it. There's no way the opposition, in a million years, if they have two brain cells to rub together, they let the opportunity go by to absolutely guarantee that the government never, the next election will be gone. So it's not an economic problem; it's a political problem.
See, the issue I have there is, so America went through this readjustment, so we have an idea of what will actually happen. So it's not so much the initial drop that'll be harmful. I mean, yes, the initial investors losing out is bad, but the ones you're talking about with the $1 million homes that only have houses worth about 200,000. The actual problem is the people that have paid off more than half their loan, or not even half their loan. Let's just say they paid off a portion of their loan, and then they're like, "Oh, hang on,
Yeah.
if I walk away from my loan, even with the penalty, right, and even with the chapter, what's the equivalent of Chapter 11 in Australia?"
I don't know.
Bankruptcy.
Okay, so even with the bankruptcy, declaration, right? Sure, I'm not going to get easy credit for a couple of years, but still, I walk away ahead, maybe a couple 100,000, and that is the biggest problem you're going to face: people walking away from their homes.
Well, that's
right?
not a problem. That's people realizing that they're better off elsewhere.
No, I agree with that. So what I'm talking about is media-wise, right? Is people walking away from their homes saying they can't afford it anymore, and that sells.
Yes.
That sells
Yeah.
politically enormously.
It does, but it should also be noted that the adjustment in the States was not a result of a relaxation of zoning regulations.
No.
It was a result of a lot of problems with their where does one start?
Was the
Banking
mortgaging?
regulations.
Well, it's the mortgage market. It's Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac particularly. But
Yeah.
I mean, in that
another
case,
topic.
it got to the point where it just couldn't go on any longer.
Look,
And I
guys.
think we're quickly getting to the point where it's just, in Australia, it cannot go on any longer. You're essentially locking future generations out of housing completely if something doesn't change.
And
I want
hopefully
real
it will.
change.
I'm happy.
It's just like, I want real change, not a series of bubbles.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm starting to think of that song.
Oh, that's all. Anyway,
Yeah,
Vickers,
well,
go.
that's- What? Sorry, what? You want me to start singing?
Oh, you were saying you're about to say something. So
No. So, yes, politically, this is like ripping your Band-Aid off. You're gonna. There's political terms are too short to really stand for the full range of the adjustment. You might, if you did it on the first day that you got in off your 3-year term,
yeah.
you might get out just in time for the economy to start growing again. Back to being growth, back to be where it was before, which is a travesty because I have a suspicion that the political opposition would come in to reinstate the bubble, unfortunately, and that would be the biggest problem, really. It's just
Well,
like,
the
well,
thing is
congratulations, we
that
just
would be
fixed it, and now you're
beneficial.
back into growth.
Even that period would be beneficial, I
Yeah.
suspect.
Absolutely.
Because essentially you'd have the readjustment, and then you'd be going from a different status quo because you would have had 3 years of increased supply and deregulation. So the change in the use of the land, because I mean that's as much a problem is that there's
So-
plenty of land that's already currently occupied by a house. It's just they can't redevelop that land to be of a better use.
So, I get the feeling I'm going to be the political pessimist here and say, yes, you've had the readjustment once, but you've got to realize that if someone gets it, it's not even though the status quo is different, the language has also changed at that stage. You've had 3 years of this enormous downturn, and your political opposition has basically been hammering away saying this is the wrong approach.
Yeah.
Right? it becomes impossible further down the line to sell it ever again. And this is the problem, you know, your Marxist and your Leninist, that particular brand of communism has because of the fall of the USSR, right? They can't sell their brand of communism, which is why they've had to change it to, you know, greens and all this other.
This is all a bit much. I think we're engaging in a bit of speculation here. That first of all, that it'll happen.
Well, the housing market is based on speculation. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Of course, those damn speculators. I mean,
all I'm saying is that, you know, maybe it will turn out well. Maybe it won't. Everyone will be better off.
I mean, I think leaving aside the dearth of people who are unable to.
Not everyone. That's not true. Not everyone.
No.
You know, it's
I'm
Well, damn it, I think that affordable housing is a human right and ought to be treated as such.
You damn communist, Austin! You betray us with your communism. I mean, I think you know, it's one of those things that it's probably a saleable prospect. Like, you could go in an election with a platform of this sort of thing.
Yeah.
But I don't think there's anybody in Australia who's competent enough to actually sell it, and that's another problem which we've quickly run out of time. So
Guy's done a reasonable job. I mean, he's not a well-known person, but he's done a reasonable job in this area. Obviously, the problem is that he's just, you know, one politician in a minor party.
Yeah.
But I think he's done a reasonable job of convincing people that there's a problem. I think in as much as zoning regulation is talked about in Australia as the cause of high housing prices, Bob Day is a big contributor. So I don't know if it's true to say...
High housing prices?
Zoning.
To zoning? Okay.
Yeah.
To the reduction of zoning laws.
Yeah.
So, you know, I've often played around...
What I'm saying is, it is possible.
I've often played around with the idea. You've got New South Wales, you've got Victoria, and you've got these two towns that are border towns called Albury and Wodonga. I would love to see both of those cities just go zoneless, right? Like, just New South Wales and Victoria come into a partnership and say, there will be no more zoning laws on either side of it. You guys just do whatever you want. Hand it over to a local council of some sort.
Can we just set up a special economic zone then?
Yeah, that's
essentially
it.
that's what I'm arguing for. The other thing I would like to consider is something similar to how Canberra got started up, but, you know, just go like, we will give you just one 8-lane highway coming into the middle of your town, right? Everything from there on out is your own business. Like, in terms of just set up a principality, it would have to determine its own way to make money. It would have to determine its own way to, you know, basically grow the town. And I have a suspicion that most of those structures would rely on a lack of zoning provisioning, like straight out sale of lands.
By the way, I'm actually visiting the Hutt River Principality in about a month and a bit. So,
fun.
Pilgrimage for liberty. Well, anyway, that's. I think we've run out of time, so we'll have to obviously come back to some of this stuff eventually because hey, freedom rocks and governments suck, and this is going to be a real problem ongoing. So, anyway, this has been episode 12. Thanks for joining us, and we'll be back again next week.
Bye.